Kundalini energies are contrary energies of the psyche and body. They wind around the spine from its base in the first chakra to the crown of the head, following and spiraling around all 7 chakras. Kundalini Yoga teaches a way of managing this energy and of bringing about a Kundalini experience, an ecstatic state of spiritual ecstasy reached through disciplining one's sexual energy. Rather than allowing the normal release of sexual energy through a physical orgasm, Kundalini spiritual practice directs the sexual energy to rise up the spine and culminate in a spiritual union with the divine. When a person has no release, however, this energy backs up in the system and without conscious management can produce reactions that run the gamut from depression to violence. Once upon a time, I would have scoffed at the idea of a sexual union leading to a spiritual bond. But the profound truths contained in Kundalini and Tantric teachings are evident in the following story. I met Linda several years ago when we were both house guests of a mutual friend. Because I was having some premenstrual cramping, I asked Linda if she had any aspirin, commenting casually, "You know how it is." She responded, "No, I don't. I've never had a period in my entire life." Seeing my look of disbelief, she said, "I'm not kidding. You can do a reading if you want." So I did. I immediately received the impression that Linda had had a hysterectomy, but the impression was extremely peculiar because I kept seeing the image of a child having the operation. At the same time, I received the impression of intense sexual energy flowing in a very healthy stream through her second chakra, an image that is rarely found in the energy of women who no longer have their sexual organs. I shared my impressions with Linda and confessed that I was very confused by them. Linda, smiling, confirmed that she had had a hysterectomy. The rest of the imagery would make sense, she assured me, when she filled me in on her story. Linda and her husband, Steve, had been high school sweethearts in the early 60s. In those days, it was still rare for teens to relate to each other sexually. Linda admitted that she had dreaded the moment when her relationship with Steve would become sexual because at 16, she had been diagnosed with underdeveloped sexual organs, which explained why I later received the image of a child. A normal menstrual cycle was impossible for her, much less a pregnancy. Linda was embarrassed by her condition and kept it a secret from Steve because if he learned that she was unable to bear children, she feared, he might not marry her because she was not a normal woman. He might not even find her sexually appealing anymore. She had no idea whether she could even have sexual relations with a man, but she very much wanted to marry Steve. In high school, Linda had developed a fondness for playing the dulcimer, a stringed American folk instrument. As a graduation present, Steve made her a dulcimer and gave it to her the night they graduated. That night, Linda and Steve made love. She did not tell him her secret, terrified that he would somehow discover something wrong with her, some abnormality in the sex act, which was her first. While they made love, Linda began breathing heavily, not so much from passion as from fear. Simultaneously, she repeated a prayer in her mind, asking God to let them be together for the rest of their lives. In the midst of this combination of spiritual fervor and sexual love, Linda felt an energy rush move through her body and into Steve's. It made her feel as if she and Steve had become one system of energy. In that moment, she felt convinced that they would marry, even though she was unable to bear children. Within a week of that powerful graduation night, however, Steve announced that he wanted to go out on his own for a while. The suddenness of his announcement, coupled with their new physical intimacy, convinced Linda that he was leaving because something was wrong with her sexually. He had decided that he did not want to be with her, she imagined, and leaving town was his way of telling her. They parted. 4 years later, they both got married to other people. Curiously, they both married in the same month. While Linda intended to give this marriage her best shot, she had never stopped loving Steve. In fact, by the time she married, she no longer cared whether her inability to bear children or have a normal sex life was an issue to any man, not even a husband. A year and a half into her marriage, Linda had a hysterectomy because of indications that a growth was developing there. In both their marriages, Linda and Steve moved to cities away from their hometown. Both marriages lasted 5 years, and as unbelievable as this may seem, Linda and Steve divorced within a week of each other. Both also returned to live in their hometown the same month. They had been out of touch with each other during all these years and had no contact with former mutual friends. After moving back to her hometown, Linda became financially strapped, so much so that she had to pawn all her valuables, including her precious dulcimer, her last tie to Steve. 2 hours after Linda left the pawn shop, Steve walked in to pawn some of his jewelry. He spotted the dulcimer. How long had the dulcimer been in the shop, he asked. When told that the seller had practically just left the shop, he set out to find her, dulcimer in hand. That evening, Linda and Steve were reunited, and they have never been apart since. When he spotted his handmade dulcimer, he told her memories of her instantly saturated his body, and he felt flooded with love. He knew that she was in desperate financial trouble because she would never have pawned her dulcimer otherwise. That same evening, Linda told Steve about her health condition, including her belief that he had left her because she was unable to be a fully sexual being. Steve confessed that the reason he left was that on their graduation night, as they were making love for the first time, he felt an energy rush going through his body, the likes of which he had never before experienced. Hey, Jennifer. He felt as if his entire being were united with her forever, and in that moment the feeling was euphoric. But as he thought about it a few days later, the sensation frightened him, and all he could think about was running away. Linda was dumbfounded. Also that evening, Steve and Linda decided to marry, and within the week, as they made love on the night of their reunion, that same rush of energy returned, and they both were conscious of it. They thought the rush was merely from their delight at being together again, but as their sexual life continued on a regular basis, the energy increased. Steve had read about Kundalini and introduced Linda to the practice of consciously utilizing the rush of energy for both physical and spiritual pleasure. Steve and Linda's history explained my impression of rushes of healthy energy flowing through her second chakra, despite her hysterectomy. Sexual union, for all its physical pleasures, also symbolizes a spiritual union of two people. It may well be that sexual energy opens a current of spiritual energy that forms a transcendent bond between two people who are deeply in love. It allowed Linda and Steve to attain the state of consciousness described as the Kundalini experience, a total expression of the united power of the Sephira of Yesod, the sacrament of communion, and the second, or partnership, chakra. I'll stop there. I chose that not because of the sexual part of it. I just found it very interesting. A lot of times we take things personally. She thought that he left because there was something wrong with her, but in the end, it had something to do with him. He had to figure himself out. But this was Anatomy of the Spirit by The 7 Stages of Power and Healing by Myss. And this book is about how to read your energy, because she believes, and I believe, and that a lot of the stuff that goes on inside of us, if it stays trapped in there and we don't talk about it, and we bury it, then it will somehow manifest into a physical problem that we'll have to deal with. So a lot of the times we need to look within instead of just putting a bandage on it. So that's just my take on it, and it's a great book. Have a great day.